Hello, one and all. Thank you all for joining us today in representation of World Space Week. My name is Gautam Vishwarupan, representation of Students for the Exploration and Development of Space, the largest student-led STEM organization in the world, and I will be your moderator today. Thank you for joining us for Satellites Improve Lives. Today, we have 5 very active panelists representing industry worldwide for World Space Week in talking about satellites and how it improves lives. Could we please start with each of you representatives today with just your name, please, as well as your highest degree and university and country of origin? So I would like to open the floor with Ms. Dirksen. Could you please start?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Kelsey Dirksen. I'm representing SEDS Canada. I'm originally from just outside Toronto. My highest degree obtained is a Master's of Electrical and Computer Engineering from the University of Western Ontario. And I'm currently in the United States in San Francisco.
Could you also please mention to us the current company you're working for, your role, and which country that's in?
Yes, absolutely. So I work for Planet. For those of you who don't know what Planet is, we're an Earth observation company. We operate the largest Earth observation constellation in the world, and I am a space systems engineer and satellite operator at Planet, based in San Francisco.
Thank you very much. Next up, Mr. Hohenendal. Could you please do the same?
Right, as you said, my name is Hans. I am an engineer by training. I'm an editor of a technical magazine called Engineer IT. I'm involved in satellites through the Amateur Satellite Association, we call in South Africa AMSAT-SA. I'm in Pretoria, and that's of course in the capital city of South Africa. And I have a master's degree in engineering.
Perfect, sir. Thank you very much.
I think you froze a bit. Rakesh, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I think I will do that. Thank you. So my name is Rakesh Chandra Prajapati, and I'm from Nepal, but currently I'm based in Switzerland, Zurich. I work here, and my background is Master's MSc in Electronics and Space Technology from EPFL in Lausanne. And during these studies, I was also working in a CubeSat program, SwissCube, which was one of the first satellites from Switzerland, and it was launched in 2019. And recently, well, not so recent, but in 2015, I started Orion Space in Nepal. So basically, we are building pico nano satellites in Nepal. And one of the satellite is a Sanosat 1, which is pocket cube based, 5 centimeter cube. And our launch plan is scheduled in April 2021. And beside that, like Orion Space is doing this outreach program, training program. So we give training in pico nano satellite building, ground station building. And basically, we are focused in the capacity building because in Nepal, we don't have this workforce. I mean, there are many enthusiasts, but they don't have place where they could go and learn. So this void we are filling up. And yeah, so thank you very much. Maybe Narayan?
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Narayan Prasad.
Yeah, hi, this is Narayan. I'm originally from India, but I'm living in Germany at this point of time. And I co-founded a company about 4 years ago called SEDS Earth. We are a marketplace that people use to find suppliers, components, services, and essentially we help engineers who are trying to build space missions identify, do trace studies, identify components or suppliers they could work with, and yeah, so we have about 2,000 suppliers on our platform, about give or take about 10,000 engineers who use us every month in their mission studies and so on. I studied all over the place in India, in Germany, Sweden, France, and I my highest degree is a PhD in supply chain management related to the space sector. So yeah, that's mostly it.
Thank you, Narayan. Can we move to Miss Kelsey?
I was the first one, actually. I think we're waiting for the Professor
Okay.
Chandana.
So, Professor Chandana, can you
Yeah, I
introduce
am
yourself?
from Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka, I am Mr. Chandana Jayakrishan. I am an academic actually attached to the Department of Physics, University of Colombo. I am the director of Astronomy and Space Science Unit there. So, and also I work as a, I serve as a board member of the Arthur C. Clarke Institute, where we send the first satellite. So I think that's it. For the time, my highest degree is PhD.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Sorry, guys. So as we all know, I guess that was the chance to introduce myself. My name is Gautam Vishwarupan. I work in the United States, and I actually work for the Department of Defense here. I located in Aerospace Corporation, and due to an international live stream, I actually just got kicked off the entire platform. So I've now rejoined in by phone. Sorry for the complications, but hopefully is my audio still clear for everyone here in our meeting?
Yeah.
Perfect. So let's see, who have I not had a chance to reach out to? Dr. Narayan Prasad, could you please introduce yourself to us, sir, with the same?
The introductions are done. All of us have introduced.
Okay. Well, then, perfect, guys. So for our audience today, what I would like to let you all know is we actually have a double theme today. We're not just talking about how satellites improve life, but we want to focus on the theme that said as follows. What is the vision for the next generation? So to our panelists today, not only are we going to talk about how satellites have improved life, but I would like to compare how satellites have improved life from past to present, as well as present to future. So with these thoughts simmering in your mind, the first and most general question I want to ask is, how do you think satellites are improving our life? Is it more or less artificial or more or less natural? Please take this into account by also considering both global growth as well as your country of origin or where you're located and answering. So, Mr. Prajapati, I would like to start with you, sir. How do you think satellites have been improving life?
Thank you very much. So basically, we don't have our own satellite in Nepal. So basically, we are getting data from other paid services. And last time when we had earthquake, we had this service from UNOSA. So we have to apply, and then we get pictures to see where the devastated areas are and what are the changes, the land shift and everything. So basically, beside that, nowadays the IoT is one of the main important aspect the small satellites are playing, and also like a very common thing like GPS and television and communication. So this would be very crucial part for Nepal, because we don't have our own satellite. That means we have to pay for this service, and we are getting like communication and television service. I mean, so this is also the point. Our government at the moment, they are working on, like, they would like to put their own satellite for this telecommunication service, so that the yearly expenses is much higher than the investment you could build your own satellite and get the service on your own. So this is the scenario at the moment in context of Nepal. Yeah, thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Prajapati. I would like to now pass this over to Mr. Hoendal. So I guess continuing from his perspective between the artificial and natural, how would you like to back it up, sir?
I think perhaps the interesting thing is if we go back in the past, when the first small satellites came about, there were a number of small satellites that were stored and forward. So in other words, you uploaded stuff, and next time somebody would download it. Next time the satellite comes over your country, you would sort of retrieve whatever the person was telling you. And it had an interesting application in some parts of Central Africa, where they didn't have anyone that was qualified in reading X-rays and scans. So what would happen is they would upload an X-ray onto, it was an amateur satellite, onto that amateur satellite. In the US, they would download that scan or that X-ray, interpret it, and then send the message back. So when the satellite came over Africa again, which could be in a couple of hours' time, but it could also be the next morning, because most of those passes were circular orbits, so you would see it twice, maybe 3 times a day if you're lucky. And they would then download and pass that information back to the doctor, who would then be able to read exactly what the expert said he should be doing. And that has progressed until many other amateur satellites. And I think the most exciting project going into the future is called Oscar 100, which is a Qatar Amateur Radio Society satellite, which is actually geostationary, and it gives 24-hour communication of the whole of the African continent, all of Europe, and quite a large portion of the East. And the interesting part of that satellite is they actually have now emergency channels on that satellite. So should there be a disaster somewhere, like we've seen in Mozambique, you could upload, or you could actually in real time communicate and send these messages, because it is a satellite that will allow you to put in imaging, television, as well as of course the normal audio. So I think there's a great future in that kind of process. And then in South Africa, or in Africa itself, we're also looking at a number of smaller satellites again, which will be in the constellation. And that is, there's one already in orbit that was produced by Nigeria. South Africa is looking at 2 or 3 of those in the next few years that will then be used to monitor agriculture, flooding, human settlement. So that's where the future is going. And I think a lot of future will lie into sort of like constellation of various satellites that would complement each other. They're relatively low cost compared to the current information you can buy from some of the commercial operators, and that tends to be, as we heard earlier, quite expensive.
Perfect. Thanks to you, Mr. Groendahl. From both of what Mr. Prajapati and what Mr. Groendahl said, I would actually like to hand it off now over to Ms. Dirksen. They've talked about the potential of the future, but now as one who's a recent graduate and the face for the next gen, how would you like to implement and, I guess, recognize where the next generation is headed with your experience at Planet at the moment?
Absolutely. I mean, echoing exactly what Hans was mentioning, constellations really are the future. You have, whether that be telecommunication constellations and things like Starlink, or constellations like what we have at Planet. I mean, our whole motto at Planet is to use space to help life on Earth, and that's what drew me to join this company. Is we're using imagery of the Earth to be able to make meaningful and impactful decisions when we're looking at change. I know in the past we had satellites that had a revisit rate of maybe once monthly. So images you're looking at over a certain area, whether you're doing agriculture monitoring, for example, those images are already out of date. Whereas with constellations where you're having, images every single day over the same spot on Earth, you're able to see the change every single day and be able to monitor things like agricultural and crop yield, like things like disaster management, floods, things like that. So I think the future really is in constellations, and especially with Earth observation imagery, because it just opens the world up to all of us, which is really, really interesting. And it's definitely a perk of working at Planet is we get to look at very beautiful images all the time. It's one of my favorite things about my job is being able to see all the images we get to capture. Related a little bit more to Canada specifically, we have Canada has our RadarSat constellation, which is 3 satellites that are imaging the Earth as well, and those also are used to do things like monitor climate change, as well as disaster management and things like that. And I think it's especially prevalent for Canada. We have such a beautiful country, but we're constantly facing forest fires every single year. The same thing here in California. As well as being able to capture the devastation to the Arctic shelf while it's incredibly sad, it's incredibly important to learn, what's happening on our planet, and being able to use satellites and satellite imagery to do that is incredibly powerful. And I think that it's only going to grow. A little bit more about, I guess, communication. I think it's also super important in Canada. We're such a vast and big country, but our population is relatively small to other countries like the United States, for example. And we have, our population is so spread out, and we have people living in, the Northern Arctic or Northern Labrador, which are very remote areas, and being able to communicate with them is incredibly important to be able to, not only provide education, but also resources, and be able to communicate effectively with all regions across Canada is something that, future constellations like Starlink or other telecommunication and internet provider constellations will hopefully be able to do for us. So that's kind of where I see things are going.
No, perfect. All three of you, thank you so much. So to our audience out there, I wanted to give you a good perspective. What we did now is to break down natural versus artificial, and to comprehend satellites are improving life through opportunities from past, present, and future. With our first three speakers trying to go and derive what certain operations we have at the moment, I would now like to hand it off to Dr. Prasad and Dr. Jayaratna to ask the real question, global perspectives. How are satellites currently affecting the lives of people worldwide? And what are these contributions, consisting of to provide in terms of world relations? So, Dr. Prasad, I would like to start with you. What's your take on this?
Yeah, this is a very interesting and important theme. Much of the Earth observation side, I think, Kelsey mentioned it from the remote sensing and the Earth observation side. But today, we do see a lot of the applications at a global level, which impact all of us. The biggest one, from my perspective, is climate change, because today, what happens in one country affects the other, and the way resources are used and monitored, affects the neighbors, of course. And you see this theme of, for example, wildfires all over the world, in California, in Australia, in India, in other places in Europe, and so on. So we need to look at common themes that affect geographies all over the world, which allow us to tackle and consolidate all the information that we have in each and every geography, in a way that policymakers in every geography can reflect on the data to make decisions that are intelligent and worthy of making now, so that the future generations are benefit from the decisions that are made today. So unfortunately, due to a lot of the maybe political differences in the way that policymakers approach policy making that affects all of us, at least if one region starts acting on information, you see results from one of them, and satellites are a main part of this. And the second part of it, coming from a developing country perspective, is to look at what indicators can the satellite world or the community of satellite owners of satellite, or people who have the satellite capabilities, can provide to countries who don't have the assets, to be able to give them the backbone to do the kind of the legwork that they need to do to take those decisions. Today, I read a recent study saying almost 50 parameters that are very critical to decision making for the Sustainable Development Goals, for example, they come from space. And not every country out of the 150 odd countries has the capacity to build satellites or launch them, or to even invest in building those satellites assets up. But then there are those countries that do have the satellite capabilities, have the launch capabilities. But now the question is, how much of a nudge it is possible for us to give to them to make the information relevant for these countries, to be accessible to them in a fair and a transparent manner, which kind of helps those policymakers drive those decisions. So of course, making data available itself is one thing, but if you can actually give the insights on top of the data directly to those countries that are relevant to geographies and to their jurisdictions, that becomes the next step. I've not really seen the world take that step yet, but I'm hoping to see that happen in the next years.
Apologies, I just realized my mic was muted. Thank you so much, Dr. Prasad. I believe I was going to ask Dr. Jayaratne as well for his opinion, but I believe we might have lost him. For those in the background working behind the scenes, give me any updates if we have so of Jayaratne being able to join us once more. But Dr. Prasad, you brought up a very important fact, and this is very significant for the next generation of space, which is what SEDS is very enthusiastic about. We want to bring space to those without. We want to bring opportunity for those without. What that requires, however, is having a lot more satellites in space and a lot more access to be able to provide all of these different unique values that every solar cell country requires. So this might be more of an off-the-record type of question, but as we increase the quantity of satellites, or what we can now soon to be identified as space debris in space, how do we know a good quantity of actual satellites in space? This is very much an off-the-record like question. So please, this is not affiliated to the corporations or countries you're representing, but this is as a personal perspective for the future of space. So with that being said, I actually want to leave the floor open in terms of, as these satellites are now being developed and then put into space to give access to all, what happens with space debris affecting the entire space ecosystem? Floor is open to all, so anyone, if you believe you have an answer that you would like to announce to the world, please go for it.
I guess I can say from my perspective, I think it comes down to having a responsible decommissioning plan. So when you're launching a satellite, it's important to think about the lifetime of the mission, as well as the lifetime of the satellite after its mission is complete, and whether that be, putting that in sort of a quote unquote graveyard orbit, or if that's going to be burnt up in the atmosphere. I think that's something that should be considered by all parties that are launching satellites. And I think that's because, more and more satellites are being launched. So I think that's something definitely important to think about, is not only the lifetime when you're operating your satellite, but also what's happening to your satellite after you've stopped operation, and how you can ensure that it's not going to cause collisions or be detrimental to other spacecraft operating in space.
Perfect, Mr. Erickson. Mr. Pajapati, I believe since you come from also a pico and nano perspective alongside clusters and constellations, what is your take on the future of space debris and for prevention or preparation for this?
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, so basically, as we registered our satellite very recently, and one of the requirement is that the lifetime should be less than 20 years or 25. So unless you could meet that, so how are you going to prove? We do simulation, we put the size and mass of the satellite, and then you can simulate and then see how long does it take to deorbit. And that time should be less than 20 years. If not, then you will not get frequency allocation for your satellite, which means you cannot launch. And yeah, so I don't know like how many in numbers, but obviously we know that with the new space, there are lots of small satellites launch coming up, and by the end of this year, we already have maybe 6-7 satellites launched, which is of our class, the Pocket Cube, which we are building in Nepal. So already 6-7 satellites going up by the end of this year, and by the mid of the 2021, there will be another 6-7 satellites. So already in roughly a year, the Pocket Cube size satellite will be roughly added by 15, let's say 15 satellites. And there are, and also to inform you, like there were 5, I think 5 Pocket Cube launched, and one of the Pocket Cube launched from Hungary, the built in Hungary. It just came deorbit, or the disintegrated during the deorbit a few weeks ago, and the lifetime of that Pocket Cube was around roughly 9 months, or roughly, let's say, a year. So our satellite, the class we are working, Pocket Cube, they have a typical lifetime of a year. And the other topic is also about talking about the orbit, because if you focus on the education, you don't need the longer lifetime. So there are other satellites which has a lifetime of 2 weeks. I mean, this is very good for the engineering students who can build and launch and get the mission data and finish the task. Because for the students who are building, they will just imagine like if they have to wait for a year to launch and have the data, then the momentum, the enthusiasm could drop. So for the students, it's good that they launched the satellite, and within few weeks or month, they give the data, analyze, and submit the report, and they are happy. So this is also there. And for that, the orbit is around 250 kilometer. So this is another class of satellite, 250 kilometer orbit. And another one, the Pocket Cube we are building, it's targeted for 500 kilometer. And for this, we have roughly 1 year of lifetime. So we are focused on educational part. Yeah,
Perfect.
thank you.
No, thank you so much. Is my audio clear for you all? Sorry, for some reason I just got cut out and I'm back in. Thank you so much, Mr. Prajapati. From there, I would like to now proceed to Mr. Goindal and Professor Jayaratna. As he mentioned, we're talking about the growth as well as the preparation for space debris. But for both of you with quite a bit of experience in both industry, with Mr. Goindal with 50 plus years, and now Professor Jayaratna also being in academia, how do you determine the rate of which satellites have grown, say, from the past 50 years? And how many years from now do you think space debris is going to take to become an eventual problem that needs undivisible attention? So, Professor Jayaratna, I would like to start with you, sir.
Actually, some of our postgraduate students are working on some theoretical models on how to remove this debris effectively, and collecting them into one place and then remove it. And there are various techniques of removing debris, and it will be done in future, I think, because otherwise we have no future for the space activities. But let me tell you that maybe in 25 years, I think it will be a huge issue that if we don't act it now, like this ozone layer protection treaty, like thing, Montreal treaty and all like that, we will have to have a kind of a mechanism that to remove the debris and take care of them by the countries those who have sent them. So that is, I think, is eventually we have to do that. Right now, actually, that we are also having a kind of all sky camera system where we are tracing the falling debris and all. So these are kind of interesting things for students to study, but. Yes, I mean, there'll be a solution. I don't think we have to worry too much about the debris. There will be a solution, yes.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Professor Jayaratna. Now I want to hand it over to Mr. Goindal. Do you either agree, disagree? Please. I would love to hear your take as well, either representing South Africa or just you as a person in general. Sir, you're still muted, as a heads up. Mr. Goindal, you're still muted, sir.
Sorry, I'm muted in two places. Okay, he's unmuted me. Right, do you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Right. I believe that it is a problem, as our previous speaker said, unless we take action now. There's some interesting developments. There's one of the universities in Germany recently developed a system where CubeSats would be able to be deorbited at the end of life through a very simple sort of engine that could be built and small enough to go into a CubeSat. The problem, I think, is a lot of the student satellites or university satellites that go into a 500-kilometer orbit, and then actually after 6 months or a year, they fail and there's no use for them. But the problem is they won't deorbit for quite a number of years if they're in a 500-kilometer orbit. That's why for these short-term projects, a 200 to a 250-kilometer radius orbit would be the ideal, because then your satellite would re-enter within maybe a year or 2 years maximum, and that would solve the problem. The other problem, of course, is with the commercial geostationary satellites. They often are not able, particularly other ones, to be deorbiting. All they do is they move them out of the way, out of the existing geocentric orbit. But the other issue with that is that in some cases now they ran out of fuel, so they had to wait for the natural deorbiting, and every satellite will deorbit eventually, and the time span at the moment is 25 years. I think the people in the US, they particularly now looking at some of the student and amateur satellites, particularly all the CubeSats, the PocketSats, that they should have some form of deorbiting at an earlier date. But there's a lot of new developments taking place, and then interesting development is from the University of Surrey, where they developed a system whereby they would send up another satellite that would actually grab the defunctioning satellite, and then the two of them would deorbit. But it is an issue, and I think that governments need to perhaps be more sensitive about it and start perhaps making more funding available to see how can we deorbit satellites that are no longer functional.
Perfect. Thank you so much, sir. So now that we've had a chance to get each of your individual opinions based on how interactive you've been with satellites, as well as your individual visions of where we've come from and where we're headed, I actually want to get a chance to look at each of you individually and get your personal opinion of, based on your history of your country with satellites, do you have a personal favorite satellite and why? This is a little bit off grid from where we're going, but I want to give a little bit of a comic relief with our audience, as well as you all, to actually get to know you more a bit personally. So actually, Dr. Prasad, can we start with you, sir? What is your favorite satellite, or national satellite, or international satellite, and why?
I would say I have two favorite satellites in that sense. So one is from the older generation, which is ATS-6 flown by NASA. And the reason why I mentioned this particular satellite is because it was used in India to conduct the largest sociological experiment as it stands even to this date, I think, where about 2,400 villages were connected through the NASA ATS satellite through a television network to provide satellite TV through which education, healthcare, agriculture, weather-related information was broadcasted. And this was the evidence or the test that ISRO and NASA collaborated to provide evidence to policymakers that space and satellites are worthy to be invested in if you can reach people in 2,400 villages. And so this was in the 70s, I think, when they tried to do this experiment. The second favorite satellite that I have is a satellite flown by ISRO called CubeSat. It is the world's only geostationary educational satellite. It carries transponders that are dedicated to or used by only universities in India, where universities were connected through satellite transponders for the best of the professors and teachers to use the satellite transponders to reach out to universities and colleges in remote villages where the teacher quality may not have been as high as modern cities, for example. So these are very two interesting applications on how satellites can be used to benefit people who otherwise have very little opportunities. You have to unmute yourself. Yeah.
Gautam, you're muted. So we didn't hear you.
Do you want to share your favorite satellite then?
I think
Rakesh?
Yeah, maybe
Go
we will
ahead.
go ahead with that. Okay, fine. So, as I already talked about the Pocket Cube we are building in Nepal and which we are planning to launch in 2021 April. So that will bring me to talk about one of the first Pocket Cube launched in 2013. So that was by Bob Twiggs. I mean, everybody will know Bob Twiggs because in satellite CubeSat and everything. So he was one of the the idea came from him about the CubeSat. So he also introduced the Pocket Cube, which is a 5 centimeter cube satellite, and one of his team built a satellite Pocket Cube, and it was well known as $50 satellite. So you can imagine like all the people who would like to build and launch satellite, and if you hear that $50 satellite, then everybody would be like, like, huh, can you do that? So as I had also the dream to build satellite in Nepal, so when I came across this $50 satellite, it drew my attention. Like, wow, can we do that? And there, I studied. The best part is they put all the material online. So anybody who are interested in building a small satellite, just Google and you will find their I think they have a drive somewhere collected all the materials like circuits, the design, and all the pictures. So it will help you to understand how to build a simple satellite like, Pocket Cube, Pico Nano size satellite. And the attraction is that it was using cost component. So off the shelf, you can buy this component. And we are also using the similar component. One of the radio communication chip they are using, we are using the same, but the latest version. It's just the different in the version. Otherwise, we are using the similar communication chip. And beside that, the structure is a simple aluminum structure. And we have this PCB covering from all the side, and we have solar cell on top of these. And one of the face, there is an antenna. And for the antenna also, we are using this very standard measuring tape. So whatever we are doing now, we learn from $50 satellite. So this is one of my favorite satellite. Thank you.
I can go ahead.
Yeah, I think we
we're just
move
gonna go
ahead.
on.
Yeah, sure.
I'll go ahead. I could list the hardware IDs that we use at Planet, but it wouldn't be as interesting. So I'll choose a satellite outside of Planet, but those are probably biased my favorite because those are the ones I get to actually control, which is pretty cool. But for me, I would say it's kind of a two-part answer as well. I'm extending it, but my favorite satellites would be the GRACE, Gravity Recovery and Climate Experiment satellites. Sorry if you could hear my cat in the background. Those satellites I used for my master's thesis. So I'm, again, a bit biased that I like them a lot because I wouldn't have my master's degree without them. And their mission was to be able to measure gravity anomalies from space. But I actually used them to study space weather events. So I used their accelerometer data to be able to detect interplanetary coronal mass ejection events, which are basically these huge explosions on the surface of the sun, and they send out high energy particles into space. And when these interplanetary coronal mass ejections, or ICME for short, just so I don't have to keep repeating myself, when they reach the Earth's atmosphere, they can cause changes. And the changes that I was interested in was looking at how they change the overall density of the Earth's atmosphere over short timescales. And this increased density can cause satellites to shift off of their orbit paths, because you could think of, this short-term increased density causes a short-term drag effect increase, and thereby can sort of offset the satellites off of their intended orbit path. And this could again be a huge issue for satellite collision, and also just from an orbital operation perspective as well. You hope that your satellites are not moving unintentionally. Related, I guess, a little bit more to Canada, my favorite Canadian satellite would be the Alouette 1. And this was because this was the first Canadian satellite ever launched in the early 60s. I think it was 1962 when it was launched. And it propelled Canada to be the third country in space after the Soviet Union and the United States. So I think without the Alouette 1, I probably wouldn't have been able to be inspired by, the current technology that Canada has to offer in terms of space with the Canada Arm and so forth. It really kind of was our first step into the space industry as a country. So that's probably my favorite one from Canadian perspective as well.
Wow,
Hans, do you want to go ahead?
Great to hear.
Yeah, I would like to add
I'm
something from Sri
temporarily
Lanka.
subbing in for.
Okay. Yeah. No, I just want to tell you about this space debris issue. Is a big issue now for the astronomy as well, because it will hinder a lot of important observations, earthbound observations. So if we don't solve this problem of satellite debris in space, in future all our telescopes will have to be kept only in space because of this issue. So these are some subsequent issues that we have to address when you launch a lot of satellites and the debris. And in respect of the Sri Lankan view, that we only have launched only one small nanosat so far, that is Ravana 1 in last year, 2019. But we have some plans to develop 3U satellites in 2-3 years and some microsats, and those are at 400 kilometer orbits, but even at higher levels later. But most of our concerns are, that we can use it for to prevent drug trafficking and also human trafficking.
Awesome. So hi everyone. My name is Quasi. I am a VP External for SEDS Canada, and I'm just going to be a temporary moderator while technical difficulties are resolved. So nice to see all of you, and I'm very thankful for all of your responses. I guess our next question is, where do you see the future of satellites going?
I haven't had the opportunity yet to talk
sorry
about my
that.
favorite satellite.
Go ahead with that first.
All right. My favorite satellite was called Sunset. And Sunset was a development between radio amateurs, the University of Stellenbosch, and various other participants in the project. The satellite was launched in the US, from the US by NASA. It took quite a few years before the actual launch took place. But the interesting part of that satellite was that it had 2 transponders on board. And the transponders, the one was an amateur radio transponder. And in fact, we were given about 6 weeks to develop the payload for that particular satellite, the amateur payload. Eventually, it was integrated, but when the satellite was launched, only the transponder that had the amateur payload on it worked. And the interesting part was, for me, that as soon as the launch took place and the actual satellite was switched on, if you like, after all the testing was done, I had the opportunity to be the first one to actually use the transponder. I was living in Durban at the time. Between Durban and Stellenbosch, the actual developer of the satellite was Professor Garth Milne, or the late Professor Garth Milne. So I had the opportunity of making the first ever contact through that satellite. So to me, it's always been the favorite satellite. Eventually, of course, the satellite also had a camera on board and a number of other experiments. But eventually, after about 6 years or so, it was succumbed over the Bermuda Triangle when it sort of was hit by radiation, and it was the end of that particular one. And then the second favorite one was called Sambandila Set. And the interesting part of Sambandila Set, it also had an amateur payload on it, and that particular payload actually was the first one that operated after the satellite was launched. They had quite a lot of difficulty in switching on the other payloads. And so the first payload was actually the amateur satellite. That satellite was launched in Russia. and it was sort of managed and operated by the CSR, which is the Council for Scientific and Industrial Development, and later on by the Hartebeeshoek tracking station, which is quite well known in the satellite world, as many of the larger satellite launched often we provide the facilities to do the initial testing before the satellite gets turned or the antennas get directed. So to me, that was the second most exciting satellite that I can tell you about.
Great. Thank you for sharing that, Glenn. Especially that first story. I think a lot of SEDS members' goals is to be able to communicate with satellites or send something to space from which they have had a role down here on Earth. And so again, Gautam extends his condolences and sorries for the technical difficulties, but we have about 13 minutes left and a few more questions to get through. And so the next one again is, where do you see the future of satellites? And I guess the future of satellite technologies. We know there's a lot of new ideas. A lot of ideas are at a low technology readiness level, but where do you experts see the future of satellites? And for that, I'd like to start off with Mr. Prasad.
Yeah, so thank you. I think there's two ways to answer this question. So you could answer it from a technology perspective, that you have quantum communication, you have optical communication, you have internet from low Earth orbiting satellites, and many other aspects with respect to Earth observation in synthetic aperture radar or in thermal imaging or other aspects coming up. But for me, I think what we could look at is, which is more interesting than the technology itself, is what are the new kinds of problems that satellites are going to solve that were not solved in the last 50 years or so. Because that lens is more useful because it directly communicates the value to the society. And for me, I think there are many use cases which are unexplored. So for example, today, about 500 million people in India are still not connected to the internet. And satellites are the only means that you can connect them, with India having 650,000 villages, for example. There are very concrete examples where satellite-based IoT can make a lot of difference to large communities like farmers. About 125 million families in India directly work on farms. And today there are companies in India that are trying to embed low-cost IoT sensors that people can use directly on farms to connect to an Android app that can use satellite connectivity to tell them what is the quality of the soil, which today normally takes like 2 or 3 weeks because the soil samples have to go to a special lab, which gets done later. And so 2 weeks is a lot of time in agriculture, especially if you're in and around the monsoon season. So there are tremendous applications that come up when you look at communities that are unserved or underserved in agriculture, in fisheries, in forestry, in water, air quality, all of these. And so I see a lot of scope for countries like India, Southeast Asia, Africa, and Latin America, where there's tremendous amount of untapped potential for problems that are unique to those geographies, unique to those the communities living there, to be served. And technology, I think, should only be matching the needs of them. So that would be kind of my perspective.
Yeah, you made a great point there about technology not being the end, but kind of like the means to the end, which is benefiting things on Earth. And so I know Dr. or Mrs. Dirksen have experience working at planet and Earth observation. Do you have anything to add to the topic of where the future of satellites is going?
Yeah, definitely. I'm really excited about the future of CubeSats and how Rakesh has been talking about picosats. I think it's really interesting that we're able to make space more accessible to people that, you don't have to come from an Ivy League university to be able to touch something that goes into space. And that's also something really cool about the Canadian CubeSat project, which I was a part of at the University of Western Ontario, where we were given a grant by the Canadian Space Agency to be able to help fund the build and launch of a CubeSat. And this is a completely, student-run teams, and we have teams all across Canada that are working on CubeSats, a part of programs that previously have never touched space hardware, or Western doesn't have an aerospace engineering program, but we have mechanical engineering, we have electrical engineering, and software. So we have all the components that we can work together to make a CubeSat. So I think the future of CubeSats is really exciting because it again allows space to be more accessible to younger students, and it gives them the opportunity to be able to get real world engineering experience before entering the job market. It's definitely one of the reasons I was able to get a job in the space industry was by participating in programs like these during an undergrad and during a master's student as well. I also think it's really exciting about the possibility of CubeSats beyond Earth. For example, the Marco mission that was the flyby with the NASA InSight Mars probe lander. I think that's super interesting to see how CubeSats not only have to be just Earth orbiting, but can also be for missions to the moon and beyond. It's definitely challenging, but it just goes to show that CubeSats aren't something to be, that they're not doing real science. They really are doing real science and making impactful contributions to the space community and the science community. So I'm excited to see the future of CubeSats and see all the different teams that are launching out of Canada and what their projects are going to be doing.
Yeah, it's really amazing how far CubeSats have gone since the early 2000s. Would any other panelists like to add to where the future of satellites is going?
It will be just an ad again, like rough, like generally speaking, it will be in application IoT. IoT will be the main, application area that satellite will focus. And other topic would be as the size is getting smaller and smaller. So like CubeSat is one of the thing. So these two would be go hand in hand, like smaller size and low orbit and IoT service. These 3 point connecting these dot will be the main application area. And also the other topic from my side would be this: the smaller the satellite gets, the more it's easy to penetrate to the people who would like to go into the space business. So this is the main thing, and that's what I am here for, to democratization of this space, because we are more focused on satellite which is as small as 50 centimeter cube, so pocket cube satellite. And with the Pocket Cube satellite, what we have built, we can also use it for IoT, to like if you would like to monitor the remote area, like if there is a flooding or if there is a something wildfire or something. So we will have sensors laid in the remote area where people cannot visit or accessible easily. So we will have such kind of like a ground transmitter, which is very cheap, could be like $5 or less. And also the transmit power is very small, so we can distribute these in the remote places, and our satellite, they will receive the signal from these small transmitters and then downlink to the center hub. Like in context of Nepal, it will be like Kathmandu. So we will collect the data distributed along the countries from the remote places and then dump the data to Kathmandu center. So we will be able to keep track what is happening if there is a river flooding or something. So with our satellite now, which we are building, we are able to do this. And the only topic is like our satellite at the moment is applied for ham radio application, so amateur satellites. So it depends how you would like to go ahead. Like if you want to use as commercialized way, then you might have to apply different frequency, kind of like
Okay.
yeah. So
thank you for sharing. You shared a lot of great details for where
Okay.
could go. Yeah.
I'd like
Sorry,
to add
Dr.
something to
Yeah,
that.
sure.
I'm looking at it a little bit differently. I think that yeah, CubeSat and Pocket Sets, they have a great opportunity in the future, because it will just bring in new generations of students and people interested in space. But I'm looking at two aspects of future in satellites, and the one is particularly to study the sun and find out what happens and how does it affect the ionosphere and propagation of radio signals. And there's a lot of misunderstanding, or actually lack of understanding in that. And the other one I'm looking at is a satellite that would actually harvest the energy of the sun, like a wireless power transfer that you use for electric cars. They would actually beam that energy to Earth, so that we can solve our energy problems in the future without having to resort to nuclear, or to store coal fires, like fired power stations in many parts of the world. Uh, it's more effective than solar panels. So harnessing that energy of the sun and then beaming it from that satellite down to Earth and distribute it in the network. To me, I think there's a future in that.
Great. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. It's a very futuristic outlook on a new application of how we can really use satellites. And so I'm cognizant of the time. We have about 2 minutes left. And so, sorry to put everyone on the spot, but I guess our last question is, if you were to describe your experience working with satellites in one sentence, maybe in one word, maybe even a few words, what would it be? And so, I guess for that, sorry to put you on the spot. I'm going to start off with Mr. Rakesh.
Okay, so basically it's just a dream job, that I would say. I mean, that's what I'm here, like interested in satellite and working on it. Yeah.
Great. Mr. Prasad?
For me, I think it's just like absolutely like it's a mix of being in the world of science fiction and having to do like reality at the same time, and so that has been the experience so far.
Mr. Glenendal?
I think for me the thing is this: the opportunity to explore new things all the time.
Amazing. And lastly, not least, Mrs. Dirksen?
For me, I would say the word comes to mind, surreal. It still doesn't feel quite real that I can actually communicate, and I'm actively, operating satellites right now as my day job. So it's definitely quite surreal and dream job for sure.
Great. Honestly, thank all of you for taking the time to share with SEDS worldwide. It's the first time we've done an event like this, and really happy to have you experts with a breadth of experience to talk about how satellites help us on Earth. And so I'd just like to thank you for being here. Small round of applause. And also thank the organizers of this event for making it happen. And so for the viewers that are listening in, we will be having another panel in 30 minutes with different SEDS representatives from other countries, if you would like to join in on that. Sorry I couldn't get to your questions, but perhaps if you were to leave them in the chat, I can transfer them over to the next section. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Oldu peki. Ben çıkıyorum telefonda.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to those that are joining after the first session and for those that are joining for the first time. And so what are we doing today? Now we are doing the SEDS World Space Week panel. And so just a brief introduction to what SEDS is. SEDS stands for the Students for the Exploration and Discovery of Space. And there are multiple SEDS groups worldwide. And today we are very fortunate to have representatives and experts in these SEDS countries talk to us about the benefits that satellites bring to the world. And so in this panel, I have the pleasure of moderating a discussion on how satellites improve life with 5 professionals representing organizations from 5 different SEDS countries. And so in alphabetical order of their countries, their names are Marco Romero from Angola, Will Santiago from Puerto Rico, Arsev Eraslan from Turkey, James from the UK, and Tatenda Manyuchi from Zimbabwe. And so I'm not going to give them enough justice by describing their background, so I'll give them an opportunity to explain for themselves what they do. And so I guess the first question that I have for everyone, and I'm going to start off with Mr. Tatenda Manyuchi, is can you tell us a little bit about your name, your country, and what you do related to satellites? And so you can unmute yourself on the bottom. Okay. Can all of the panelists give me a thumbs up if they're able to hear me? Okay, I'm not sure if Mr. Tatenda is able to hear me. So I guess we'll start off with Marco Romero from Angola. Can you tell us about your name, your country, and what you do related to space in about 30 seconds or so?
Okay, Marco Romero from Angola. I'm a space system engineer with a background in aeronautics and ballistic and navigation satellite operation at the Mission Control Center there in Angola to deal with all the dynamics and the control of a satellite in orbit. And a part of that, I work on education and outreach right there for expansion of the Angolan space program and the new space itself. You are muted, Quasi.
Great. Sorry about that. Thank you for that introduction. So next up, Mr. Jacob Smith, would you tell us a little bit about your country and what you do related to satellites?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. Great to be here. So yeah, my name's Jacob Smith. I am chair of UK SEDS. So one of the UK chapter of SEDS. So obviously we provide opportunities to students to engage with the space community, learn about the sector, develop skills. I'm also involved with a couple of other organisations. So I'm on the board for SSPI UK, which is the international group of space and satellite professionals, and involved with the British Interplanetary Society on their events committee. And I have a background in mechanical engineering. I've recently graduated with an MSc in astronautics and space engineering, and going into a job next year in the satellite industry for Surrey Satellite Technology, SSTL, which is one of the leading providers of satellites in the UK. I have a bit of experience working with satellites already. I did an internship with Airbus where I was working on structural analysis of satellites. So yeah, I'll keep it brief.
Great, thank you. Next up, Mr. Will Santiago.
All right, thanks for having me. Hopefully you can hear me okay. My name is Will Santiago. I'm originally from Puerto Rico. I'm actually in the US now because I work for Lockheed Martin Space in Colorado. My background is in aerospace engineering, and I'm a deep space exploration engineer. So we work on robotic missions, interplanetary robotic missions for NASA. So that is including missions at Mars, at Jupiter, and a few deep space telescopes, including Hubble and Spitzer. So I have had the opportunity of working development programs, so designing the spacecraft for NASA Jet Propulsion Lab, at NASA Goddard Space Flight Center, along with Johnson Space Flight Center for some of my human spaceflight background. And then I have had the opportunity not only on designing the spacecraft, but also supporting flight operations both at Mars, at Jupiter, and a few of the space telescopes.
Great. Thank you for that introduction. Next up, we have Mr. Artsev Eraslan. Sorry, we're unable to hear you. Would you be able to unmute on the bottom left? There we go.
What is the problem? No, you can't hear me. Is that it?
Now we can hear you
okay.
loud and clear.
Can you hear?
Yes,
You
we can hear you now.
Okay. I retired from NASA. I was a chief scientist of National Technology Transfer Center. I'm in Turkey now, and we are working on aerospace-related research. I'm an aerospace engineer. Starting from the Apollo project, I worked on research continuously. So, but I'm very interested about your organization because the last time I talked to Caltech, NASA Caltech Center in California, they were very much interested in trying to make use of the satellite information and make sure that they can stop disasters by the information coming from the satellite, evaluated on Earth, and then trying to take all actions to prevent it. So I think it may be an interesting area for your organization too.
Great, thank you for that introduction. And lastly but not least, can we get an introduction from you, Mr. Tatenda?
Hello? Were you talking to me still?
No, I'm talking to Mr. Tatenda now. Yes, we can hear you now. Would you be able to introduce yourself and talk about what you do related to space?
Good evening, everyone. Sorry about that. Well, okay, can you hear me now?
I can't hear him.
Okay, it seems like you might be having a little bit of some internet difficulties. If you would like, you can type it into the YouTube chat, and then we can say it out loud.
I'm founder of an emerging Earth observation company called Kozi.
All right. So we're going to go into the first question of the day. And so the first question is, describe how do satellites improve life? And you can be as specific or general as you'd like. Personal experience is definitely more valuable, especially to our viewers. Our viewers today, most of them are young professionals and students that are interested in space. And so for that question, I'm going to first direct it to Jacob Smith from the UK SEDS.
Yeah, absolutely. So how do satellites improve life? I think it's quite obvious if we turned off GPS satellites for a day, then the whole world would just collapse really, and a lot of industries wouldn't be able to work. But thinking more outside the box, if we look at the International Space Station, for example, that's a satellite, and the amount of technologies that have been developed for the International Space Station that are improving life on Earth is just countless. So then, like the scientific experiments that we're able to do in microgravity are developing new medicines, pharmaceuticals, basically allowing us to understand a lot more about the human body, which is then feeding into life on Earth and us people on the planet. So that's really important, and hopefully that will continue for much longer. Other technologies, there's been a lot of robotics developed for that, which is then making its way into industry manufacturing here on Earth. If you think about things like water purification technologies that have had to be developed for the astronauts on the station, then they are making their way into commercial ventures in developing countries, so allowing people who don't have access to water quite easily to have access to these purification facilities, technologies. So that's really improving life in a lot of countries. And then the whole ISS as a whole, it's been developed by a number of countries across the world. So it's really been improving international collaboration. It couldn't have been done without this. So that's really beneficial in linking these countries and forming good ties between them. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, thank you. So you mentioned a few really good things. Earth observation, international relations, amongst some of them. Marco, would you like to tackle this question? I know you have a lot of experience with regards to education, and I heard you also have a children's book.
Yeah, I've published 3 comic books that are satellites, kids and satellites. The third one was exactly A Day Without Satellites. And the goal is always to show people. Normally, you show by their usage, as Jacob was explaining here, because sometimes when we work, as Santiago told, on deep space exploration, it's hard to explain how the downstream, how the importance of space is totally connected with us. Moon also is a satellite. We're talking also about natural satellites. Moon also is a satellite that has a lot to improve the tidal forces that the moon gravitational pull implement on the sea level. They have an influence even on our body in the structure of our for human, but I'll focus just because we normally talk about sustainable development goals, and we are targeting like more than 169 indicators. And if we see those indicators, Earth observation, as you told, they can benefit more than 50% of the SDGs. Earth observation in Angola, for example, daily life, we communicate, we see TV, we try to connect as we are doing now, this streaming using internet, satellite communication. Otherwise, if it wasn't Mr. Clark, Dr. C. Clark, telling us that the best way to establish worldwide communication is by putting a satellite on a geostationary orbit. We can see several.
I think you have a lot. You have a lot of great points there. I think we're going to get to some of them in just a minute. So I'm going to pause you there, just so that we can hear from a few more people. Can I hear from you, Mr. Will Santiago?
Yeah, a lot of really good points that Mr. Romero and Mr. Smith just mentioned there. As I said, I'm kind of biased with my deep space exploration experience. But take, for example, a GPS, right? So we're developing the next generation of GPS satellites here on our facility in Colorado for the Air Force. And that next generation has so much technology that sometimes we don't think about with respect to just thinking navigation, but then take the banking industry, right? The delay, the latency, it's hugely important for the global market and those international partnerships that GPS can support. We're also developing the GOES satellites, so weather satellites. So we're developing that next generation of satellites. Global impact, right? So establishing those international relationships is extremely important. On the deep space exploration side, it's hard because you're going so far away from the sun and so far away from Earth, right? So developing the technologies, for example, on the Juno spacecraft at Jupiter, first time that we are able to explore the outer planets with solar power, increasing solar efficiency, right? Those things, those technology developments can easily translate back to Earth here, and efficiency of solar panels and electrical energy and more sustainable resources. So there's a lot of combination here that it's particularly SEDS and the students, right, that are coming into the industry can really help develop these technologies and take all the science missions that we have, right, that NASA has. All of that information from Mars, Jupiter, you name it, it is global, it is worldwide. So learning where we come from and sharing that information and having international partnership with instruments. On Juno, we have Italian Space Agency instruments. On Mars, we have multiple instruments from DLR and other agencies. So it's those international partnerships. I'm glad you brought that point with ISS, because that is extremely important to continue working together and solve some of the big challenges that we have.
Agreed. Yeah, you mentioned some really great points there as well. And so now I'd like to hear from Mr. Arazlan. I know he has a lot of experience on the software side of things, but I guess just in general, how do satellites help Earth? Sorry, you're muted again.
Behaves into space lab experiments and did the modeling. One thing shows immediately that if you have any kind of a liquid, then you cannot test how your experiment is going to be successful or not on Earth at all. So what it boils down to is you have to have the software computational modeling capability to be able to simulate it on Earth. And after that works and you see it, then they tell you that go into the next room and start running the code about how it'll behave in orbit or going in space. So computational capability is becoming very, very important in all space programs. And today, I think in your paper, I saw the artificial. We don't do artificial. We call it usually digital is the word that NASA came up with, digital flight. We do the most digital things in such a manner that every modeling capability that we develop can take the whole simulator of that space vehicle, and you can practically ride it and feel it and see what's going on. So we are going very high level computational simulation capabilities in Turkey and also in the United States.
Great to hear. Thank you for sharing that as well. From all of you, it sounds like satellites provide a lot, from applying high-end technologies to international relations, Earth observation for disaster management, as well as allowing us to actually think of devising these very complicated computational models that we use in areas of our lives that we don't even think of. And so I remember earlier, Mr. Marco mentioned that although the theme of this week is how satellites improve life, there are more satellites than just the artificial satellites that we send up into space. There are also the natural satellites like the moon. Basically, everything's a satellite of a satellite. And the whole concept that we send satellites into space to kind of observe other satellites is very interesting. And so what I'd like to hear is, how do you think that these artificial satellites also help us here on Earth? Either the research that we're able to do on them or the presence of them themselves. And so for that, I'm going to bring it back to the person that originally mentioned it, Mr. Marco.
Yes, as I started explaining it a little bit before, so exploring those artificial bodies all around the space, they can give us direct benefit as they influence their physical parameters. They influence our life here on Earth, as the example of the gravitational field, the tilt of the Earth, those 23.5, I think, of the tilt of the Earth. They are induced by by the moon, for example. Even when we are going to other moons, we are trying to go to Europa, we are trying to go to Titan, we are trying to go to those places to see habitability conditions, to see, to know how life can be developed on those places. And they have like methane lakes. The regolith mining, a lot of people are talking about regolith mining either from asteroids or from the moon. They can improve or even break the economy on Earth. They can they can serve as to boost the space exploration economy. And again, I won't extend too much. It's just the fact of, even for the environment, asteroids or the way we explore moon, they are directly connected to the to the environment. If we made a cost benefit of the CO2 emission of a rocket launch here from Earth, or using on orbit assembly, or using mining resources to make this exploration, because moon is our gateway to the space, our first basement, or I call it the second basement after the ISS. So they are also the gateway to the space exploration, and the space exploration can benefit us here on Earth more than 2,000 spin-offs from space technology that benefit us here on Earth. So this
Agreed. There's definitely so many benefits and spin-offs involved in exploring even the natural satellites. And there's so many benefits of exploring that has to Earth. And so I'm going to direct a similar question to Mr. Eraswan, since I know that you've worked on the Apollo missions, which have helped land humans on the moon. I want to know, what are your insights on how that mission has benefited us here on Earth? Sorry, you're muted again.
Okay, can you?
Yep, now I can hear you.
Now I can hear you. Okay. Now, Apollo project was very, very interesting. If I can have 5 minutes to talk about it. It cost $30 billion in 13 years, and that's equal to $300 billion on today's dollar. So when you look at it, the situation was, everybody knew about the NASA's job of trying to get to the moon, but the really critical and important thing in that thing is not getting a man to the moon, but getting him back home safely. And that problem became a very big issue, and it was work on, research was done on the US Air Force AEDC Center, AEDC research area in Tullahoma, Tennessee, 80 miles from Huntsville. But one thing came out in that thing, that in space, and especially aerospace vehicles, in the design of them, wind tunnels were very weak. Any information we got from the wind tunnels, and every time we tried to use that thing straightforward, it never worked on the re-entry problem, and we were getting nothing until July of 1964. We got IBM and CDC computers, and we tried to make a computational model which will simulate, basically, with a given shock layer position and temperature conditions and everything else, we could calculate all the flow conditions over the heat shield and figure out if the heat shield is going to save the astronauts or it's going to perish. So what happened was, what I'm trying to emphasize in here, that the computational modeling didn't come into aerospace. Somewhere in the middle, it came right at the beginning of the space program. So now it's getting stronger and stronger, but when it comes to going out of the atmosphere, we are getting pretty reluctant to concentrate on concentrations. But if you are going to live in it and it has liquid and fluid in it, then computational modeling is essential. That's all I have to say.
Great. Yeah, thank you for sharing that and highlighting the importance of computational modeling. I think, Jacob Smith, do you have any insights on how exploration of natural satellites like the moon helps with Earth, life on Earth?
Yeah, definitely. So one of the reasons I kind of got into the space area was just from looking up at the night sky and looking at the moon and the stars. And the most inspirational thing for me is just looking up on a clear night at a whole moon and just seeing it there and just thinking about the people who've been there before and the opportunities it's going to offer in the future. So I think it's not actually, there's other benefits that are kind of not tangible, but just through inspiration, just anyone in the world can look and see the moon and be inspired by that. And I think that the future missions coming up to the moon to put the next people on the moon are going to inspire a whole new wave of people into space. And the space industry really started with the Apollo missions, with that goal to get to the moon, and that was that drive to get there. And I think that's going to be really useful coming up in the future missions, and then looking up at Mars as well, inspiring the whole next generation into the space sector.
Totally agreed, and well said. I totally agree. It's always important to remember the humanistic side of wanting to go to space in the first place. And I know that iconic, I think it was the Earthrise picture, is still my screensaver on my laptop. And so now I'd also like to hear from Mr. Will Santiago. I know you were working on future missions to send, I guess, two satellites. So what do you have to say about this topic?
Yeah, I'll try to be brief. So there's a couple of things. So take the Juno spacecraft at Jupiter, right? It's interesting. We have planetary protection requirements, right? Not only from an NASA standpoint, but the international community, right? So if there's some resources that Mr. Romero was kind of bringing up, right, like mining or something like that, right, we don't want to damage it. So we have a requirement to deorbit Juno because there's a lot of interest right now on sending a mission to Europa. So the moon of Jupiter, Europa, has very likely more liquid water under a layer of ice combined than all the oceans on Earth. So if there's water there, potential for life, right? And all these things, right? One other mission real quick. So a few floors from me here in our building, it's our Mission Control Center for the OSIRIS-REx mission, which will be the first mission to collect a sample of an asteroid, Bennu. So we are literally, I think, 11 days away from performing that attempt. So there's a lot of work with the engineering team downstairs on the operations of that spacecraft. And one of the key things besides threats from asteroids here to Earth that Mr. Romero brought up was the resources, right? So in the acronym of OSIRIS-REx embedded in there is some mention to resources and mining. So it is a carbon-rich asteroid. So we are bringing that sample back in 2023 to understand how simple it is to collect a sample, right? It has been done already by Hayabusa. This will be the first US mission, and it will be the first actually sample return in a while since the Apollo missions. So pretty important, but understanding the composition of the asteroid, right, and all that information, right, it can help us in the future for those rare metals that we may not have access to, that we need to develop new technologies here. Understanding how to bring that back is going to be really important. So stay tuned. I think it's 11 days or so, the first attempt to collect that sample. We don't get it back until 2023, but really exciting stuff that's happening with across all the space agencies coming up here pretty soon.
It's amazing, yeah. So you said 11 days, so we'll have to keep our eyes tuned for that. And wishing all the best for that mission. You know how stressful working on these type of missions can be. And so big congrats for that. And so I guess now switching gears back onto artificial satellites around the Earth. One thing that satellites are really good at is collecting data that we would otherwise never have. However, the question is, are we using the data provided from satellites to its fullest capacity? And if we are not, how can we better use the data provided by satellites? And for that, I guess I'm going to start off with Mr. Marco Romero.
Oops. Oh, sorry, I was muted. So as you asked, like personal experience, we'll focus a bit on Africa. That Africa only have 40% of the sustainable development data, the sustainable development goals data. For example, if you want to feed people, to achieve the SDG 2, that is the feeding people hunger zero, you need to look at the possibility to produce that food and to distribute that food Otherwise, you won't feed people. So if you can track that, if you can track the infrastructures to have access to the crops, if you can implement precision monitoring, precision farming, you are not getting a track of those indicators. And this happened with all the rest of SDGs. And is struggling, according to the researchers, only 2/3 of the only Africa is struggling with almost 2/3 of data for SDGs, like healthcare is struggling with healthcare, education, and we are talking here with the SEDS, with SEDS students. Students that can easily develop their project management and engineering skills by looking to the space exploration, even the industry itself. The Challenger explosion was a huge disaster in terms of mission achievement, but most of the lesson learned from INCOSI and PMI, they came, the philosophy of managing projects, the philosophy of doing engineering, they changed after those lessons learned. So there are a lot of things that we are that tell us that we are not exploring the space data at a maximum, but we need, and we just need to make sure that people right here know how to explore the downstream. That's the good thing about new space. Even universities, schools, they can launch a pocket sat by $50.
Yeah, some great insights that we definitely need to make better use of the data that is available to us, because there are Earth applications. And so I guess, would any other panelists like to add on to some of these comments?
Yeah, sure. So I won't repeat anything. I'll just I thought I'd share a story that I actually heard in a recently in a panel. So this is we know how broad ranging space data can be and how it can be used by so many different sectors. And there's an organization in the UK here called Satellite Applications Catapult. So what they try and do is bring different companies. They do a variety of things. One thing they do is bring together companies from different sectors and try and introduce try and tell them how their company can benefit from space and space data and help them out with that. So one there's a company who owned a nuclear reactor, and they're having some problems because there were some jellyfish coming up and swimming up through the river, from the sea, up into the cooling room, and basically putting this nuclear reactor out of action. So they didn't know what to do. So they thought, actually, they went to a space agency and said, can you see these jellyfish from space? And they thought, yeah, we could do that. So they could track them and they could see when they're coming in, and they could basically warn the company, the nuclear company, to turn off their reactors before the jellyfish got in and broke it. And that's great. You can use that space data. That's one use. But what's really interesting is that there's always multiple uses for one set of data. So this is where I think we could be doing more across bringing different industries together, different sectors. So there was this. They thought, we've got this data now on the jellyfish. Who else would want to use that? Would anyone else want to use that? And in fact, they looked up and they saw that there's another industry, completely different thing. I think it might have been like a cosmetic or beauty product sort of industry sort of thing. And they want jellyfish. They want some sort of product that they use jellyfish to make. And if they knew exactly where the jellyfish were and that they could get to them, then that would be really helpful to them. So there's this satellite company who has this data, and they can set it off in two different directions, so two different industries, and really help them out, both of them. So I think that's a really interesting point, and we could try and make more use of space data in that sort of way.
Great, yeah, you mentioned some great opportunities to use space data. Mr. Arslan, did you have anything to add?
I didn't get information very well from about the jellyfish, but I'm looking at more important issues. And we worked for a long, long time in trying to simulate the environmental impact of the nuclear plants. This was not related to space, but it was extremely costly and extremely time consuming. Now with the satellites in orbit, now we can have at least 64 to 66 satellites going over my head every day. But if you look at that thing and you use the information that the satellites can produce, then you can practically create continuous help and very high level help for the people living on Earth. Now, let me just say one thing about you, which may sound very funny. When we finished the Apollo project, Congress told us that with the exception of taking pictures of our Neil on the moon, what advantage did we get out of it? So they asked us to model something. Do you know what they asked us to model from the space program? HIV virus production, and at the same time, how can you stop it based on the socioeconomic conditions of the people living in settlements? So what I'm saying is that we are not using the information we are getting out related to the space and use it for the well-being of the people living on Earth. We are getting into big trouble. Look at the heating conditions of the atmosphere. What are we going to do now? There are no ice left, and we are going to have big problems. So the problem is going to come in, the solution is going to come into the problem is that you observe it from the satellite, then you use the necessary computational scientific methodologies in order to figure out what is going to happen in the future. And most importantly, if you're going to change something like stopping tsunamis, make sure that the computer will tell you if it's going to work or not. So, and one last thing, now 100 teraflops of computer time machine costs $1,000. So you can give anybody now a supercomputer of 10 years ago, and you can use the computational fluid mechanics capabilities to do almost everything for no problem. From $300 million computers, we're going down to about 10,000. So computers are going to be in. Computers are going to help a lot people trying to figure out how the right way to live on Earth by using the information from space. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, thank you for all those insights. And I totally agree that satellites can tackle really big problems here on Earth. So still on the theme of artificial satellites, what I'd like to ask next is, obviously satellites have proven to be a good thing. And it has been the case now that we are sending a lot of satellites into space recently. When do you think we'll reach that point where we really need to think about how many satellites we're bringing into space? Or do you think that space debris is an issue that we need to tackle? And for that, I'm going to start off with Mr. Will Santiago.
Sure. Yeah, we have that debate right now here with the Starlink constellation, right? That SpaceX is sending up for global internet access, right? So you hear every now and then about astronomers complaining about the visibility for the things that they're trying to observe from here, from Earth. There's still obviously a lot of space, right, around the Earth orbit, but it is becoming a problem. Just recently, I think I heard that the International Space Station had an avoidance maneuver that had to be performed, right? So I think it's not a matter of a future issue. The issue is here now, and it's been here for a while, right? It's a matter of those professionals coming up into the industry to really focusing and tackling the issue. Like SEDS an extremely important organization, right? Because you have visibility and perspective from all around the globe, and it's important to have that perspective on how it's going to affect everybody. So simple answer, yes, it is an issue today. It is something that we need to be cautious about and consider when we're sending things up there. And this whole concept of reusability, about trying to get things back, right? And all these things, it's extremely important. It's something that I don't think it's 5-10 years from now, it's here. And back to the theme of sustainability, it is still our planet. We're on this satellite and we're putting more satellites around it. It's still that whole orbit above us. It's ours, and we have to be responsible stewards of our world and the little satellite that we fly around the sun. So yeah, it's an issue that I think it's today that we need to focus on.
Thank you for sharing that. Would any other panelists like to share their thoughts on space debris? I see Mr. Marco with his hand. Go ahead.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So very briefly, I would just tell that this thing of space debris is being at least spoken on that side of the continent by NASA since '78. We heard at that time this analyst talking about the cascade effect of this collision of the debris we are creating, not only after the projection from the first satellite, but also it was called thanks to the person that brought that to life, was the syndrome of Kelsey, that is showing us that the amount of debris that we see, and we're talking on that time probably on pieces of 10 centimeters. Now the pointing accuracy of satellites, we are going to prosopes, we are trying to make more and more rendezvous, we are trying to invest on on-orbit servicing, and we are trying to come up with the solutions to better use or even to accomplish with the standards for end of life. We need to make sure that we can identify first, catalog, track, and after that avoid, because avoiding the algorithms that we use to avoid are not enough. I won't tell that they aren't enough mature, but they are complex to decrease the sustainability of or the cost effectiveness of a space mission exploration. So it's not now. It's for yesterday. It's for yesterday.
Great, thanks for answering that. And so now I'm gonna maybe switch the tone a little bit. I've heard so much knowledge has been dropped today into our viewers. Now we can take a break mentally, and I guess the next question is, what is your like thinking of your own country's national history with satellites, or just in general, what is your favorite satellite and why? And so I guess maybe I'll start off with Mr. Eraslan. What is your favorite satellite?
Favorite satellite? I really don't know. I really don't know. I mean, we usually work about satellites without their concentrating too much on their names. The satellites, I think, as I said before, that I would really like to have is, as you explained, we have to clean the skies. That's absolutely true. But low Earth orbit plus satellites, again, will try to help us try to figure out better ways to live on Earth. My favorite satellites, therefore, are not the ones that go, high orbits and all that, but basically trying to generate information that will help the Earth people.
Great answer. Thank you for that. Mr. Jacob Smith, would you like to take that on? What is your favorite satellite and why?
That's a good question. I'll stick with the space debris theme, actually. Go back to that. And the company that that I'm going to start working for, SSTL. They've led on last year, well, recently, the Remove Debris satellite. I'm not sure if people have heard of that, but it was the first to demonstrate in orbit the capabilities of removing debris. So they had the two sides, and they had a net. They had a few different experiments. They had a net, they had a harpoon, and they had a solar sail. I think the solar sail didn't quite work, but the other two were successful in demonstrating that technology for the first time of actually capturing a piece of debris. And I think that's really exciting. And there's lots of companies, Astroscale, for example, who are developing this sort of technology as well. So, because as was mentioned before, there's thousands of satellites and that are just defunct. So I think I'd say that's my favorite. But then just building upon actually the space debris bit, there's gonna, as was mentioned, Starlink. I can't remember the number. I think it was like 14,000 they're going to put up over the next decade. And if you think that the failure rate of about 10%, how many is that going to be? A lot of dead satellites already. So these satellites are going to be really vital, and I hope to see more of these removing debris satellites. But it does need to come from the start as well. Well before you actually launch the satellite, then it should really be a consideration. And I think there are some rules. It has to deorbit itself within a certain number of years, 25 years or something. But yeah, we're not going to do it without these sort of satellites.
Good answer. I think one of our questions in the chat was, what do you think about the Starlink constellation of satellites? And I think you also answered that nicely in answering what your favorite satellite would be. And so next up, I'm going to ask Mr. Will Santiago, what is your favorite satellite and why?
Oh, wow. I was afraid you were going to put me in this spot. I worked too many missions still flying that they don't let me pick one. So I'm going to give you the other side of the answer. Since you didn't say artificial or natural, I'm going to pick Earth, right? Because, I mean, it's the only, working in these space operations for so long, right? I mean, it's the only place that we know currently that sustains life, right? I mean, and I'll tell you even more. If I had to pick one satellite, any satellite that we send up there, it's a human endeavor, right? You might not have a person up there, but there are people behind every single one of this mission. It may not be a crew spacecraft like Human Lander or the Orion spacecraft, etc., right? But every single mission here, it's a human endeavor. And I think from that standpoint, I can't really pick one because there's so much effort and work for all the engineers and the students that put into these new satellites, these CubeSats, that their heart go into it, right? It's sometimes careers that people spend on these missions, whether it's going to Jupiter or Mars or whatever, right? Every single one of these are human missions. So to me, it's extremely important that we think of it that way, even when they are uncrewed, if you will.
Well said, well said. And last but not least, Marco Romero, what's your favorite satellite?
My favorite satellite, even though it doesn't exist, is the UMBISAT. Is an all-African satellite that is being built by a group of young African engineers from different countries of Africa. And from those 15 core engineers, this knowledge will be passed to the rest of African countries, regardless the existence of a space program on their countries, their backgrounds. We want to include at least 55 countries that are on the continent by building ground stations, orbital capabilities, CANSAT development. We want to integrate and to start transferring the knowledge from people that are around the world, but they are bringing that back to Africa with cooperation of other countries. That's the UMBISAT. This is what we are trying to develop all young students and to contribute to the future existence of the African Space Agency, and to give them a try on how to bring all Africa together around the project, and at the same time to give the opportunity or to fail fast or to succeed fast, because that's the beautiful of nanosatellites and the new space.
Great answer. I think, yeah, collaboration for these satellites, we know how much work it takes to put them up in space. So collaboration is important. And there's many passionate young students and young professionals that are interested in doing big things in the space industry. And so I guess the next question kind of relates to that. And it is, what is a good way to start if you are interested in, I guess, sending satellites to space? Many of you have like extensive careers, but I imagine you started from somewhere, or you built certain connections in order to get there. And I think, given our viewers are lots of students and young professionals, what advice would you give for a student or young professional that's interested in creating satellites? And for that, I'll let anyone volunteer to take that on.
I'll take it fast, just to don't take too much of time. So to start, build a CANSAT, join a group of colleagues at your school, and buy a Raspberry, or ask someone to buy a Raspberry, build a SatNog, launch a rocket, explode the rocket, and after that, talk to people who developed a 1U, 2U, 3U, 4U to create a university program. And after that, you'll be more than ready to launch a satellite and to put it on orbit, because there are a lot of launching initiatives. Try meanwhile to do microgravity experiments. Try to contact. Try to exchange with the SEDS. Try to exchange with SGC. Try to build. There are a lot of codes. There are a lot of kits. There are a lot of opportunities. A CANSAT, with the $300, you can build a CANSAT. And we can, even for deep space exploration, you have rover back CANSATs that can simulate a rover. And with that, you will be ready not only to do like the parabolic or the standard trajectory flight, but also to test like surface exploration.
Great answer. Will, would you like to add to that?
I'll state it very simply. Being here online today, right? I mean, being part of SEDS, I didn't have that growing up in Puerto Rico. I mean, the words science, technology, STEM, engineering, and math, right, didn't even exist when I was going into in high school growing up in Puerto Rico. But to me, the little things were like science fairs, right? Just participating in your science fair, just learning that camaraderie of working with others, right? Space industry is so global now that you have to learn to work with others. So it's extremely important that you learn those life skills, if you will. But I mean, being even here, right, listening to SEDS and being part of SEDS and getting involved in an organization, whether it's not international, even at your school, those little projects where like rocket launches, developing small sats, etc. Right, you're growing up in a whole different world where like small sats didn't and CubeSats didn't exist when I was going to school, right? So those opportunities encourage the universities to assign funding, right, to these projects. So extremely important. But network, right? I mean, you're doing that here in SEDS today, and understand not only the challenges that your country faces and how space can help, but globally. Think globally with the space debris problem, right? That you can work together and just bring everybody together, whether it's natural disasters, commercial industry, banking, and making the connections across industries, not just the space piece. So that's how you get into it, I think. Just get involved in something as simple as it may sound, as little projects in your garage. That's where we all got started. I mean, my mom would yell at me when I would like try to uproot grass in the yard, trying to design my little rocket launch pad or airports. So that's where I got started.
Great answer. Thank you for sharing that. And I just wanted to emphasize to all the viewers today that if you are interested, you can join our respective SEDS organizations. In this call, we have these are experts that are affiliated with SEDS organizations in the UK, in Turkey, Puerto Rico, Angola, and Zimbabwe. In the previous session, there were even more countries. So I'd encourage you to get involved with those SEDS organizations, as they tend to have projects such as CubeSat projects, rocket launch competitions, even business case competitions, depending on what your interests are. And so I think just being cognizant of time, we probably have enough time for one more question. And so I'd like to ask, what technologies or applications are you looking forward to with regards to satellites? I know right now we're in an era where so many new technologies are available at a low technology readiness level. And we mentioned today that there are many applications of satellite technology that haven't been explored. So I guess just to close it off, I'd just like to ask what our panelists are looking forward to. And for that, I'm going to start off with Jacob Smith from UK SEDS.
Yep. I am most excited. I think the small satellites, CubeSats, pocket cubes, that's really where the future is. The technology that has been crammed into these big satellites 10 years, 20, 30 years ago is now being crammed into even smaller handheld size satellites. And I think that provides so many more opportunities for young people to get involved. It's a lot more accessible. It's a lot cheaper, quicker. So it's really that opportunity for education, outreach, inspiration. I think that's really important. But also just using them, like NASA used, I can't remember what the mission was called, but NASA was using some CubeSats to send to Mars. So it is also these big agencies and companies using CubeSats for their worth. It's not just students, but I think that's a really important aspect that I'm excited about.
Nice. What about you, Mr. Eraslan?
Well, I'm going to hammer on the same thing I'm saying. If you have undergraduates, smart, and they want to work on satellites, the best thing to do, really, I'm going to say the same thing again, do this thing in a digital form. Because, as I said, you can practically take a student, give him a $1,100 computer, and if you can have the software to do, then you are creating basically not artificial, but a digital version of the whole satellite. So in the experiment that we considered in the past is that when you're working with the real structure of the satellite, if you make a mistake, it's up in the orbit, there's no way you can practically correct it at all. So this is a very big problem. And if you have a young kid who's trying to work on it and he's smart, he will be afraid to say, okay, I'm doing it, building it, I'm shipping it. So before he says that, or she says that, it will be really good to use the available computational modeling capability, hammering on the same thing again, and have the satellites built in digital form so that you can change anything you want on that satellite and try flying it again. You can change its orbit. It's all done with the computer. And when everything looks good, then you call Huntsville and say, ship it. But what I'm saying is that starting with the conceptual design, once you know what you want on your satellite and what you want it to do, then basically the science are going in the way that the rest of it is all going to be digital until you're almost absolutely sure that it's going to work. And that will take the load off a young kid who doesn't know what he's doing. But that's not bad. He's learning continuously as trying to do it. Right? Everything he comes up with an idea, you run it on the computer and say, hey, you're smart. You got the right thing. Or the computer would say, you're not that smart, so do this. So what we are saying is that the human resources we will be able to use the human resources much more efficiently by using computers. And I don't work for any computer company. Let me tell you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Eraslan, for those insights, and definitely highlighting the importance of of computation in satellite technologies. And so with that, I think it's now time for closing. I just want to extend a warm thank you for all of the panelists today for taking the time out of their busy schedules to talk to us about the benefits that satellites have to us on Earth. And I'd like to thank the planners of this event for making it happen. And for any viewers that are remaining, just like to welcome you to join the respective SEDS group and stay in touch for more possible future webinars. Thank you, and I guess a warm applause for our panelists today.
Thank you for inviting us.